Hello, my name is Michael B. Frisch. I'm a professor of psychology at Baylor University. This oral history and education project is made possible through the generous support of Baylor University and the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. Ruut Veenhoven is professor of the social conditions for human happiness at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. He is a preeminent pioneer and world authority on human happiness research. Ruut, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up?
I grew up in the Netherlands, in The Hague. I was born in World War II, and during my childhood I played a lot in the ruins left of the war.
Oh, really? Did that have an impact on your worldview or attitudes?
Not at all. I was not aware of the tragedy. I just liked it to play in the ruins because it was fascinating.
Okay, very interesting. Well, can you tell me what your interests and hobbies were as a boy?
I had no particular. Well, actually, I was interested in everything, but not one particular track. Mm-hmm. I liked sporting, I liked scouting, I liked playing out, I liked reading.
Very good.
I disliked school a bit.
So, no particular pastimes that come to mind?
No.
Okay. Well, can you tell me about your parents and their background?
Yes, both my parents were academics. My father was a historian, and my mother, who is still alive, an economist, and she was one of the first women to study in university economics. Very
impressive. So what were their views on education and career vis-a-vis yourself?
Well, they were both interested in an academic career because they were academics, and they were both pretty socially involved. My mother was a pioneer in the consumer movement, and she has worked much of her life in the Dutch Consumer Union. She was one of the founders, and my father was more interested in politics. Actually, he was quite conservative, and he tried to stop the process of decolonization, which took place, and well, too bad for him.
Okay, but he was he was very involved in political affairs and civic affairs.
Yeah.
What specific projects did your mother work on?
Well, within the Consumer Union, she was very much focused on testing. There's a lot of claims in advertisement on washing power, on washing machines, on automobiles, and she was very much in testing. Let's see what works best and what is the best buy for the best price.
Very interesting. It almost has kind of a experimental, empirical ring.
Yes, and I certainly got it from her.
So the whole appreciation for research and testing claims in a specific way. May I ask, what sparked your interest in sociology?
Well, I had the political interest of my father, and actually I wanted to be involved in politics and in public administration, and I had the idea of being burgomaster of some town someday. And that was one of the reasons for studying sociology, and in particularly studying the sociology of public administration.
So what led you from these political aspirations to the world of academia in particular? When did you take that change in course, and why?
Yeah, actually, it was a late choice. When I finished my studies, I was almost hired by the Dutch government. But then I also got an offer to stay in university, at least for a while, to do a promotion. Then I thought, well, okay, let's first get the doctor title and then go in public administration. But I never went there. Academic life appeared to be more fun.
That's great. Was there any particular compelling aspect of it or project that made you say, aha, this is for me?
Well, it was a kind of coincidence because I got very much involved in the abortion law reform. And, well, if you want to be politically active, you can be a civil servant at the same time. But at that time, it was very easy to combine that with an academic position. And actually, in the first 10 years after I finished my studies, the research I did was very much focused on the abortion issue.
And what was your position on that issue?
Well, I was a pro-abortion activist, and I was among the founders of an abortion clinic in the Netherlands, which was not closed. And then we had a chain of abortion clinics, much like there are coffee shops in the Netherlands where you can smoke pot. Yeah, well, it's the same policy of tolerance within limits, which allowed us to provide a medically safe abortion before the law was changed.
And do you see that as having a positive influence on society to have that option for women?
Yes, and actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I read an interesting research of an economist, by the way, and she compared the happiness of women between 20 and 40 of age in different countries, and took into account that abortion has been allowed at different stages. And she could really show that abortion had improved the average happiness of women in that age.
Very interesting. So, can you tell me what university did you go to? What was your university where you studied?
My university was actually the university where I still am, Erasmus University of Rotterdam. At that time it had another name. It was the School of Economics of Rotterdam.
I see. Well, may I ask, who were your inspirations or supporters as you decided to pursue this academic career? Were there any people who helped you along? Obviously, your parents were role models, indigenous role models in your family. Was there anyone else or other people who seemed to believe in you and support you in that career choice?
Yes, certainly. As I told, I was invited to do a dissertation and take the position of an assistant professor. And well, the one that did was my professor, Ruut Veenhoven. And he was a psychologist, the only psychologist in the sociology department. And he invited me, and he really inspired me. He learned me a lot about, not only about psychology, but also about science.
Very good. What was his attitude about science as an epistemology?
Yeah, well, he was very much in proper concepts and in a clear link between your concepts and your measures. And he was also very much interested in human motivation. Actually, I think that he had a better theory of human motivation than Maslow's theory.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he is very bad in publishing, so a lot of his work is still unpublished.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this then. It must have been a heady experience, or felt very good for your professors to ask you to continue studying, not only to get your dissertation, but with the idea of becoming an assistant professor. Was that very exciting for you and feel like a great honor?
Not very much so, because
they did that for everybody?
Well, At that time, social sciences were growing rapidly, and as a result, there were many positions. And well, you had either the choice to go out, and there were good job options, or to stay in, well, at a somewhat lower pay, but well, with the opportunity to pursue some research. And only when I started doing that, and after I had mastered psychology, note I'm a sociologist, and I was hired for teaching psychology and wasn't really acknowledged in that field. But after a while I discovered that psychology is a fascinating discipline, and I got involved in research, and so finally I decided I stay in academia.
Very interesting. So could we say there were more job opportunities in academia at that time than there are now?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. So that could be a factor. Tell me more about your graduate school years and what that was like. And
well, at that time we didn't have a graduate school.
Okay.
In the Dutch system, you had a 5-year, say what we now call master degree. And I ended up as doctorandus, which means that the guy who should be a doctor. But there were no doctor schools at that time. You were hired as an assistant professor. You did teaching, and you tried to master the science you were teaching. And then in the meantime, you had to prepare a dissertation, which usually took 5, but often 10 years. In my case, it took 15 years, because I spent about 10 years in the abortion business.
Yes, very interesting. Well, can you tell me about you began as an assistant professor. Can you tell me about some of your later years? Did you earn tenure in the system? Did they have a tenure system?
Yes, they had a tenure system, and you had a tenure system right away, which has changed now.
Okay.
But by that time, anybody who was hired and who didn't do terrible things just had tenure.
How many years did that take?
To get tenure? Just 1.
I see.
So if you failed in the first year, well, you were out. If you didn't fail, at least not obviously, then you were hired for life.
Okay. So can you tell me what changed your interest from the area of abortion, and what were your main findings in that area?
Well, in the area of abortion, my main object was to show that abortion is not that bad. And so in the public discussion there was the fear that if you allow abortion, the sanctity of life is lost, and people will kill each other, and well, that's apparently not true. Another saying was that, well, unwanted pregnancy is not really a problem, and once the baby is there, the mother is happy. Well, we could show that's not really the case. And I was particularly interested in the fate of unwanted children. And there was, well, a bit of research at that time showing that, well, children who are unwanted, well, have a bad prognosis. A lot of them get mental problems, they're unhappy, get involved in crime. So what I wanted to show that there's good reasons to consider abortion.
Very good. And are there any particular findings from your research that you're proud of from that era?
Yeah, well, we were able to show, and once the clinics started and we got a lot of clientele, and then from the beginning on, we did research, because there were so many misunderstandings, and there were poor data. And from the beginning on, we registered what kind of people are there, why are they there, what happens to them, how many of them have regret afterwards, how many of them experience problems. And a couple of years later, when the law was discussed in Parliament, we could provide data which allowed evidence-based decisions in a very highly politicized discussion.
So they actually listen to the science as a way of deciding the issue?
Well, science doesn't really solve the matter, but it helped.
And they paid attention?
And well, what I can say is that a lot of wrong empirical arguments were removed from the table, and well, of course, the main moral thing remained, but now net of misunderstandings.
Very good. Now, how in the world did you move from this to the study of human happiness in an empirical way?
Yeah, actually, I had taken an interest in happiness before, already during my study of sociology. Because if you study sociology, you study society, and you wonder what is a good society like. Now remind, I studied in the 1960s, and in the 1960s it was the time of student revolt, and a lot of my college students got very red, and they thought that the paradise was in the east in Russia, and that Cuba was the best place of the world. And I was kind of wondered, these guys, they learn about empirical research, and now they turn so ideologic. So I was more interested in what I heard in my class on social philosophy, that you could also say, well, what is a good society? A good society where people thrive well, where people are happy. And so that in politics, you use the greatest happiness principle. And what policy is the best policy? Well, that policy that creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So.
And can you tell us who this theorist is and others that influenced you?
Well, the most influential thing was that I went to my methodology professor and said, well, how about measuring happiness? Because it would be nice to know what gives the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And then the professor said, well, happiness, that's nonsense. You can't measure happiness, that's much too fake. Go back to your class and start measuring power. Well, and, you know, I was also a child of the 1960s, a bit anti-authoritarian. Yeah. So the no of my professor really made me push through and go to another professor and, well, said the professor, just take stock of what there is in the literature. And I did. I wrote a paper, as students always write papers, and now I wrote a paper about, well, very scanty research, because I found only 10 studies. But okay, you could show that in principle you can measure happiness.
And in terms of any other guiding theorists like Jeremy Bentham, or that impressed you, or no?
Yeah, well, in my social philosophy class, I had heard about Jeremy Bentham. So the greatest happiness principle was formulated by him. Yes, and I was very much inspired by that view.
And were there other people? You said this one professor supported you in trying to measure human happiness. Were there others that supported you in that way or inspired your work?
Yeah, well, actually, it was already the press. So once I had written my paper, the professor said, well, this is nice, make an article. And at that time, it was even possible for students to submit an article to the Sociological Review. Nowadays, it would be more difficult. Anyway, I wrote a paper and it was published. And then it was picked up by the press. And people said, well, that is interesting. Tell us more. Well, I had little to tell, but yeah, there was a public interest.
So, did you gain some celebrity status from this publicity, or?
Well, a couple of interviews, but not yet a celebrity.
And so, what? How did you come about a program of research?
Well, for about 10 years I more or less left the subject and was very much concentrated in the abortion law reform. But once that battle was won, I went back to my earlier fascination, and then I decided to do a PhD on happiness. And actually I did the same thing which I did when a student. I gathered all the research, but 10 years later there was much more to tell. And so in my student paper I had about 10 publications which I analyzed. 15 years later we are about 300.
Wow.
And my dissertation was mainly a review of the existing research.
So the original paper, what year was that done? About?
69.
And then the paper 10 years later, was that 1979?
No, it was even more later. Finally, my first book was 84.
And this is the very significant book, Conditions of Happiness, is that correct?
Yeah.
Which I can speak from my own experience, was a tremendous inspiration to me in Texas and to many researchers around the world. It seemed that you were taking on an impossible task where you covered philosophy and the empirical research. Did that not seem overwhelming at the time, or?
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it fitted the kind of dissertations that were produced by people who were already hired as an assistant professor. And so the demands for a dissertation were pretty high in that time. And actually more than half of the guys who entered the career in the same way failed. And so this was, to Dutch standards of that time, yes, this was how you should do it.
And how much time did you have? Did you teach a lot during this period?
Yes, I did, and that's why it took so long.
So how many years did it take to produce Conditions of Happiness?
Well, about 15 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, when I really started working on it, it was done in about 5 years. But I should have done it in shorter time. According to the standards of my university, I should have done it at least in 10 years. And I was late.
So you really kind of had a tiger by the tail in the sense of a very fascinating new area of research. Where did you go after Conditions of Happiness?
Well, actually, I stayed where I was, and I continued teaching psychology, which I have done until my retirement. I've taken up some new things to teach. I've taught Japan studies, and I've also taught a bit of methodology. But mainly my teaching was not the same as my research.
How did your research, how did you develop, what was your program of research right after you wrote Conditions of Happiness? What did you decide to do?
Well, I decided to continue that track. And what I did is, in Conditions of Happiness, I took stock of the available literature and what are the findings on happiness, or more precisely, what are the findings on happiness in the sense of life satisfaction. And I had listed these findings in a separate book, so-called Data Book of Happiness. And my idea was that if you want to do happiness policy, you should know the facts, and you should gather all the facts there are. And a lot of facts get lost. And a good thing is to bring all these facts together. Well, when I had made my Conditions of Happiness, there was one step, but the literature on happiness started growing. And so I continued. And finally that ended in the World Database of Happiness.
Which is an amazing project. So you tried to have your finger on the pulse of all the research on human happiness around the world.
Yes, at least everything I could find. Possibly there are some studies published in exotic languages I've missed. But up to now I think I can cover the literature quite well. But the literature on happiness is exploding, so it becomes ever more difficult to keep track of all the new findings that are being published.
So, I guess you've been working on some theoretical papers about happiness and life satisfaction based on this research, is that correct?
Well, actually, in the beginning, and it was the beginning I more or less made in the first student paper, what do you understand as happiness? Because the word happiness is used in many, many meanings. And, well, then I decided for a view on happiness as life satisfaction, and I also decided for a view of happiness as the result of both affective appraisal, how good do you feel usually, and a cognitive assessment, how well does your life compare to your standards. That conceptual focus I've kept, and on the basis of these concepts I've gathered all the findings.
Very interesting. So what is your current theory of the components of human happiness? You're saying life satisfaction, positive and negative affect or feeling, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I use the word happiness as a synonym for life satisfaction.
Okay.
And then the question is, how do people assess how satisfied they are? And then in my theory, they use two sources of information. First, how well they feel. It's very difficult to say you're happy if you feel lousy. But they also use comparisons. And how does my life meet the standards of the good life? Well, in my theory, it's just two sources of information. Looking at the findings, I see that typically affect prevails. And so you can say you're happy even if your life doesn't meet all the standards, but it's very difficult to say you're happy if you feel lousy.
So Ruut, I want to know more about where this feeling component comes from, that's so prepotent in the happiness stew, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I have a theory about that, a theory which is difficult to prove, but I think it's possible. I think that feelings, your feeling level reflects how well your innate needs are met. I think of mood level as, say, on some machines you have green and red lights. And if the red light is on, that means there's something wrong in the machine. Look what. And if the green light is on, the machine is running properly and you can go full speed. Well, I think that the effects, especially mood, works that way. So if people feel good on a balance, that means that the machinery is running properly and that their needs are being met. And here I got much inspiration of my promoter, Professor Ruut Veenhoven, who was very much involved in human motivation. And he said, well, we humans, we are animals, basically, and we have needs, and we shouldn't mix up universal biological needs with wants. You should make a distinction between needs and wants. And typically sociologists couldn't do that.
So what are some of the innate biologic needs or innate needs that you see as very important to human happiness and positive feeling?
Well, I think, and here I follow Rob's theory rather than Maslow's, I think that we have some needs that we're, biologically advantaged and came to be enwired. Of course, eating, drinking, temperature, but also sex. And we have a very strong sex drive. And as social animals, we have a need for companionship. And I also think that we have a strong need to use our potentials. what Maslow often calls self-actualization, and we tend to associate that with beautiful things and arts. But there's also self-actualization in jogging, just using your body and being busy. And I think that, well, it's good for the human organism that it's being used, and hence Mother Nature helps us keeping busy by adding good feelings.
I see. So, is this akin to the idea of Csikszentmihalyi's idea of flow experience, or?
Yeah, well, I think flow experience is part of that.
Okay.
Yeah, but the difference with at least the reading of Maslow is that, for instance, the need for meaning. I don't think that is innate. I think that all humans are interested in meaning. Why the hell I am here on Earth?
Yes.
But not because that had any advantage in survival. I rather think that is a consequence of the fact that we can think. So we can think what is the causal link between what and what, and so we can think why am I here? But we can pretty well live without a convincing answer on that.
Yes, certainly many feel we don't have clear answers on that. So, so part of what you're saying is that we need some compelling activity to stay busy.
Yeah.
And it may not be a dramatic art project. It could be keeping house or being a firefighter. Okay, running a shop. Okay, and but yet we ask this question, and what's your answer to that question? What's the meaning of life? Why are we here?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's a kind of biological coincidence. It's fun to be here, and I hope we are here for generations, and I hope that humankind survives the end of Earth. But I don't know.
Yes. Well, let me ask you, going back to your theoretical papers, are there any other theoretical findings that you're particularly proud of in studying happiness, which you equate with life satisfaction?
Yes, I'm particularly proud of the article, Is Happiness Relative? Because a lot of people say, well, happiness, that is just having what you want. Once you have what you want, you get accustomed, and hence lasting happiness is not possible. And well, here the distinction between needs and wants is very important, and I could also show empirically that happiness is not just a matter of comparison. Happiness is rather a matter of need gratification. And I think that's a correction of a view on happiness that unfortunately still prevails in sociology. I also had another paper that runs against a common idea in psychology. Psychologists are trained to assess personality, and that makes that they think that everything is a trait. And then some psychologists say, well, happiness is a trait. You're born happy, or at least you're made happy in the first years of your life, and then too bad, there's a set point, nothing will change. Well, if that were true, there were no sense in striving for greater happiness for a greater number. So I really was puzzled and looked for empirical indications that happiness is indeed immutable. Well, and I found a lot of indications that happiness is not. Happiness is not a trait. Happiness is rather a state.
Well, it's a very good news for those of us that have read psychoanalysts like Melanie Klein, who says development is over after 15 months.
Yeah.
That gives us very little time. And also some interesting research showing that personality changes over years and is very influenced by circumstances. So, Dr. Ed Diener's been talking recently about the difference between wanting and liking. And what he's saying is that the wanting aspect is perhaps more of a prefrontal cortex issue, and that liking is more of a perhaps limbic system located thing. And his idea is that you want to be sure that you're going to like what you want when you get it.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that idea?
Yes, I do, and it's the same distinction between needs and wants behind that statement.
I see. And is there any advice or ideas you have from your research as to how people can assess that, perhaps ahead of time or without expending too much time in exploring something in terms of career or relationships?
Yes, and I think this is where science can really help. What we can do as scientists is check to what extent the things people want really adds to their happiness in the long run. And so what we should do is follow the effect of choices. For instance, people who buy a second house, okay, fun to have the second house for the first time, but does it really add to happiness in the long run? Or could you have been equally happy if you spent half the money on an extra holiday each year? That's things we can easily investigate, and there's no deep theorizing required for that. Just follow up quite a bunch of people and see what the consequences of their choices are, and then tell people what the consequences are best for people like them, with the same social position and personality, and then we can help people making more informed choices in life.
So it's true perhaps in that we want and are satisfied by very similar things as human beings.
Yes, but there are also differences. Let me take the example of having children. It's one of the major choices in life, and from follow-up studies we see that once people get children, they get, on average, slightly less happy. And so there is a price in having children. But there's a huge variation. Some people really go down, but there are other people who get happier after having children. And then what you would like to know is, how does that work out for people like me? I'm a very active, extroverted person, for instance, and how does it work out for extroverts like me? Well, we can investigate that. It hasn't been done yet, but I think we should do. And actually, in this line, I follow my mother in the consumer union and in the testing business. What she did was helping people to buy, say, the best vacuum cleaners. And I follow the same track and to advise people to make the life choice that fits their kind best.
Very interesting. What are some of the domains or parts of life you think are particularly important for the choices we make?
Well, I think family, job, for instance, how much you work. For many women, it's a choice, especially when they have children. Should I stop working at all for a while, or should I work half-time, or should I hire a nanny and work full-time? That's really important choices. And a lot of people also face the choice, when should I retire? Should I retire at 55, or should I go on until 70? What is a wise decision? And one of the things research has learned is that we are pretty bad in predicting what will make us happy. And because we are so bad in that, we need the support of scientists who chart what happened to people like us in the recent past.
So you see, looking at the research on happiness forecasting, we really are notoriously inefficient at predicting what will make us happy. How can you, is there anything else we can do besides looking at the empirical research to guide us in our choices?
Yes, of course, and if you know better what kind of person you are, that would help. And it would also help if you reflect more on your likes and dislikes. And sometimes it could be useful to have a kind of mood diary and record for some time, well, how much do I like work? How comfortable do I feel when sporting?
So this could guide us in these very, very big decisions about, say, retirement or being a stay-at-home parent versus working outside the home.
Yeah.
Do you have any opinions about that? Those two very important choices that people face. How should a woman decide, or a man who's thinking about staying at home with children? How should they decide whether to work outside of the home or not?
Well, you can do a bit trial.
Okay, just try it out.
But you can try a child.
You can't get rid of the child, right?
No.
So, and how about retirement? What's your view there?
Well, it's also, you can't really try to retire because then you give up your career. In some jobs, you can halve your workload. For instance, if you're a teacher, you can say, well, let's try to teach only 3 days in a week. And do I really enjoy these 2-3 days more?
How about your own life? Have you used your knowledge of happiness research in your own recent retirement?
Well, I have no data on people like me and how they flourish, but what I do know is that I enjoy my work very much, and so I continue.
Yes,
and, yes. I continue without specific pay, but well, my university provides good facilities for emeritus professors, and I like academia, I like research, and actually my research team consists for more than half of other retired persons who do research for fun.
Very interesting. Well, in looking at different controversies, again, alluding, say, to Ed Diener, his current thinking is that there's kind of a floating set point with happiness, and that it's largely a matter of the extent to which it moves. It's largely a matter of temperament, feelings, and circumstances. Would you agree with that idea?
Yeah, and I would say, well, there is a genetic disposition to be either happy or not. I don't think that it's so much in the happiness itself, but it's more in the personality traits and in your health, and that are conducive to happiness. Okay. So there is, well, some people estimate it as 50%. I think 30% is a better estimate of the happiness chances you have at birth. But then certainly there is a lot depends on where you live, in what society, in what place in society, and a lot depends on your choice, whether you make the right choices or not.
So talking about this genetic inheritance, let's say 30% of the happiness equation, how does that relate to your innate need satisfaction? In other words, do you also brook the possibility of some personality traits such as neuroticism or a tendency to negative feelings? Do you think that may, or tendency to positive feelings or extroversion, do you think those temperaments exist in a lasting fashion?
Yes, I do think so.
Okay.
Well, some people are simply depressive, and I think neurotics, well, part of neuroticism may be that you're prone to negative feelings, but another aspect of neuroticism is that you often make difficulties with other people. And we have all an innate need for love and companionship, and when you're neurotic, you have more relational problems. That need is not gratified so well, and as a result, you are less happy.
Fascinating. So the negative, in fact, there's research in the viability of marriages that people with high neuroticism are much more likely to be less successful or satisfied in their marriage and more prone to divorce. Do you agree with that finding, or have you seen that? Mm-hmm.
And well, we even run research. Is it so that neurotic people still profit from marriage? And so we compared single neurotics with married neurotics, and still the married neurotics are happier. But we didn't interview their spouses.
So it may be at the expense of their spouse. So there's a very powerful positive effect for marriage. Do you see that effect for both genders? Both men and women, do they benefit from marriage, or a positive marriage?
Yes, they benefit, and it seems that men benefit a bit more from marriage than women.
And how do you explain that?
Well, that is speculation. One explanation is that men are less able to run a household on their own, and they tend to drink too much and eat bad, and for that reason get less happy. Another reason is that men are still more in power. And so in the negotiation in the marriage, they're more often the winners. And then they're very surprised when the loser sometimes says, well, I don't like it anymore, I want a divorce.
I'm out of here, okay. What about the tendency of men to have to be more socially isolated or less social skills? Do you think that's true in some cases?
I think so, yes, and I think that's also an innate biological tendency, and there are good evolutionary explanations for the greater social capability of women. And
how is that an evolutionary advantage for the species?
Well, the story goes that a man did most of the hunting. And well, when hunting, a lot of them didn't come back, or at least didn't find the way back. And though in much hunting there is coordination, you could also hunt on your own. Whereas the social fabric was rather maintained by women, and especially the mother-grandmother relationship was very important, but also women who also had children were very supportive among each other, and if not, they were selected away.
So, in part, maybe I've heard this from my own practice, that it might be adaptive then for men to not be as attached socially in say a warfare environment or a hunting environment.
Yeah.
I see. That's very interesting theory. Now, in terms of some of your theoretical ideas, there's new data and thinking about adaptation. Do you feel that we totally adapt to our circumstances and always want more, or do you feel that adaptation, we may have overestimated the tendency to adapt to our circumstances?
Yeah, I certainly think that we have overestimated that, and part of that overestimation is in mixing up needs and wants. I do buy that wants grow ever and ever, maybe partly as a result of our need to be active. And so if we have one house, let's say we build our own house, well, that's a beautiful thing, a nice self-actualization, but what to do when the house is built? Well, then you want another house. But the need to be busy and the need to use your potential is always there.
And how do we discover our potential in your mind? How do we know what our potential is?
Yes, and here as humans we have a problem because we have a very broad array of potentials. And the cat also has potentials, and the cat can chase mice, but that's about it. But we can also play the violin or read difficult books. So we have to make a choice. And well, you can know get to know what fits you well by trying a lot of things. But if you only superficially try, and one day you play the violin and the next day the trumpet, you never discover where it's really your thing. So in order to discover what fits you, you have to invest. And you can't invest in anything. So it's always, there is a guess.
Yes, yes. Well, in recent book I was involved with, we talk about the importance of risk, taking risks in terms of human happiness. And it seems that particularly unhappy people, when they move out of their comfort zone and experiment with new activities, that there is a definite benefit. Now, do you believe certain activities are more beneficial than others? For example, another controversy in the literature is, should we prescribe helping or altruistic or social service to people to be happier? Is that a universal antidepressant, if you will?
Oh, well, I guess so. We are social animals and we are hardwired to be kind. But not in all situations that works equally well. And well, if you're a suspicious personality, you may be less inclined to do so. So I really think that there are types of activity that at least suit most people better than other activities.
So in terms of your current thinking and research, you have this new program of research you're thinking about to look at what happens with people's choices. Is that something you're working on now?
Yes, and we are starting a large scale. I have a contract with a large health insurance company who is also for commercial reasons interested in the health of their clients, and we will ask the clients of this company to participate very easily. We just once a month ask them, how do you do? And they answer one question about how happy they are. And then they can compare their happiness with people like them. And for instance, you answer that question and you mark on a scale from 0 to 10, 7. But are you a lucky guy? Are other people like you score 6? Or are you actually a loser? Other people like you score 9. And so then this is a way to show people whether there are chances to get happier than they are.
I see.
But if there is a good chance, then the program also offers advice, tailored advice, all computerized. And what we also do is, every year we ask, well, has anything changed? Got a child, changed your job? And that's what the real study is about. What is the effect on happiness of choices on the long run?
Very interesting. Are there any nuggets from that advice that you give that you could share with us?
No, not in general, because we are aiming at specific advice for specific people.
Can you give me an example of a particular person that might be involved in the study? Say a worker in a factory, and they seem to be unhappy relative to their peers. What kind of advice do they get?
Yeah, well, we do have some follow-up data from another study on the kind of people you described. People in manual job and are not too happy and often in pretty bad health. These people are less happy, and we see if they take early retirement, they get slightly happy.
I see.
And so for that kind of person, it's mostly good to take early retirement, even if that involves financial loss. But there are other people who better continue working, even if they are not paid.
Really?
People like me.
So you want to die in the saddle, so to speak, or?
Yes, at least for the time being.
Okay. So you were saying you're particularly proud of the World Database of Happiness. What is the web address of that?
That is World Database of Happiness. If you Google that, you'll be there.
Okay.
If you want to have the full address, World Database of Happiness.eur, Erasmus University Rotterdam.nl, Netherlands.
Very good. And tell us what the World Database of Happiness really consists of and why you're so proud of this achievement.
Well, it's a collection of findings on happiness. And we have two kinds of findings. Distributional findings. How happy are people in countries, or how happy are people in age groups, or how happy are students. That's one collection of distributional findings on happiness. And the other collection is on correlational findings on happiness. And what goes with happiness. And to what extent is an extroverted personality conducive to happiness? Is it equally conducive to happiness in all phases of life? And, well, there are many correlates of happiness. There are societal correlates of happiness, there are individual correlates of happiness, there are life events that you can investigate in a correlational manner. And at the moment we have about 12,000 correlational findings, and that allows a good view on happiness. And so now we get so many findings that we can run, for instance, meta-analysis.
Fantastic. Ruut, can you tell me or describe, I was asking you about what you'd like to be remembered for. What are your accomplishments that you're particularly proud of? And of course, the World Database of Happiness is a wonderful resource for any researcher around the world. Do you see that being used a lot by different countries?
Yes, the World Database of Happiness is used pretty much, and mostly because it's so easily available without pay.
Yes. Are there any other milestones in your career or accomplishments that you're particularly proud of?
Well, of course, I'm a father of three. I'm proud of having my children and how they do in life. And I'm also pretty proud of my work in the abortion law reform. I think that was a good thing that added to greater happiness of a greater number of people.
That's fantastic to have that sense of making a difference. In terms of your happiness work, are there other milestones that you're particularly proud of? Or?
Yeah, well, I'm proud of the World Database of Happiness, and I'm also proud of having established the Journal of Happiness Studies.
Can you tell us more about the Journal of Happiness Studies and how it came about and its role today?
Yeah, well, in the beginning there was no journal that wanted to accept papers on happiness because journal editors were very much like my first professors. They said, well, happiness, that can't be scientific. And actually still a lot of journal editors have a blind eye for happiness, especially in anthropology and sociology. So I had problems getting my work published in the beginning. But I discovered a journal that was open for studies on happiness, and that was social indicators research, which has been established by Alex Michalos in the early 70s. So I started publishing in social indicators research on happiness, and a lot of people did. And over time, more and more papers in social indicators research addressed happiness. And as the number of submissions to social indicators research grew, then I wondered, can we better split off the happiness stuff and start a special journal? And because then social indicators research can do more of its own business, and the broad array of social indicators, and then we also have a special journal on happiness. And that's what I proposed to the publishers, and publishers said, well, let's try. And they did, and it worked.
What were some of the obstacles you faced in making that journal so successful in terms of readership and high quality articles?
Yeah, well, actually, there were not so much obstacles. The obstacles were rather before the year 2000, when nobody believed in it. But so at the time that I made the proposal, then it was already apparent that there was something in this business. So in the research between the 1980s and 2000, had solved much of the problems that were believed to be involved in the study of happiness. It was rather clear that it was just a matter that you could study like depression or anxiety. And this was one of the reasons why the publishers said, yes, okay, we go for it. And when we started, from the beginning on, we had pretty good manuscripts being offered. Not too much in the first years. But now we get more than we can publish.
In your earlier work on happiness, where the journals were not receptive or positive, how did you overcome that obstacle?
Well, actually, I didn't really overcome the obstacle that people didn't want to publish on happiness. I published part of my work in social indicators research. But it was also one of the reasons to start a web page, because then you don't need the establishment. And one of the reasons why I still work with volunteers is that I simply didn't get academic money for doing my research on happiness, because they said, well, you can't study that, and happiness is relative, and all the things that research has shown not to be true. They used that as an argument not to finance my project. So then I opted to use volunteers in the beginning, students who had some time left, and later mostly academics. And actually that appeared to be much easier. You get good people who like the work, and there's you don't lose time on making proposals, and you can simply do the work.
Very good. Well, you've certainly proved a lot of the old shibboleths to be quite false in terms of measuring happiness and the different aspects. I also am struck by your scientific epistemology again. Maybe, perhaps that you were inspired by your mother to actually test out these ideas in an empirical way. Are there any other ways that you would like to be remembered in terms of accomplishments or in this field?
No, I think this is enough. And when the journal and the database survive me, that would be okay.
Can you tell me, on a more personal level, how did you negotiate the work and family life balance in the different stages of your career? Was that a challenge? It certainly is for many people today.
Oh yes, it was a challenge, and one of the reasons why I was late in doing my dissertation was that my first marriage ended in a divorce, and I became a weekend father, and well, the weekend was holy. Yeah. During the week I worked until late, but not in the weekend. And of course that has a price in terms of career, but I was ready to pay that price.
And later on in your career, was it a challenge as well? Did that continue? Or once your children were older, was that easier?
Yeah, then it was, then I, in my second marriage, we adopted a child, and so I also took my responsibilities as a father, and which I enjoyed very much. And as today, I'm now a grandfather of 4, and I spend 1 day a week just for the grandchildren. But the other days of the week, I'm a workaholic.
Well, I also am wondering about your job, because so many academic jobs today, they may demand 60, 80 hours a week of research. There doesn't seem to be much time. It seems like your university is a little more humane in its demands. Is that possible?
Well, the university isn't so good,
Okay.
so humane. And indeed, yeah, well, in this business you must invest an awful lot of time. Just if you want to be in the first league in sports, you have to invest a lot of time in training. And in this academic business, you must invest a lot of time.
Yes. Well, you're certainly a tremendous academic star and inspiration to thousands of people. Tell me on a more personal note, what constitutes the good life for you now?
Well, pretty much being involved in my work and saving it. Because you accomplish something and you don't like the idea that it disappears in the dust of a library. So I try to make the database as good as possible and to save it, and I try to ensure the continuity of the project after my time.
Would you, reflecting back on the life of an academic and a scholar and a researcher, would you recommend this to other people? And if so, how could they get involved in happiness research from an empirical standpoint?
I don't think I would advise anybody to pursue an academic career, because it works only if you have a pretty strong drive from yourself and if you have a lot of energy. And it requires that you sacrifice something. You can't do also a sport career at the same time, and even there is a sacrifice in family life. But some people are suited for that, and if they don't get depressed in the first 5 years, they do academic work, then I would say, yeah, okay, go ahead. In the long run, it's a very satisfying job, which you can often pursue until the end of your days.
So the money may not be the greatest, but that's not the most important defining characteristic of happiness or life satisfaction?
No, certainly not. Of course, a suitable income is nice, but doubling of my income would hardly make me happier. What really counts for happiness is that you have a challenging job, and that there is always a challenge, so that you don't get bored. And this is one of the beautiful things in academic life. You never get bored here because there's always new questions.
Yes, it could be like a kid in a candy store where you always have different things to study and to pursue. So, I want to ask you, if someone wanted to get into the field of happiness research from the ground up, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I think they should start with doing some overview study, because that's mostly better to start with an overview than to pick in on a very specific subject. And that's one of the problems, because if you ask your professor, well, professor, can I be involved in happiness studies? Then the professor say, well, I have a very specific thing where you can't do anything wrong. Please do that. Okay, you don't do anything wrong, but you hardly learn anything. So I think if you engage in research, it should also be combined with a broader course on quality of life.
Very good. And how would you find a professor to work with, or a place to pursue your studies? How would you advise a young person today to do that, or an older person that wants to get involved in happiness research?
That's really difficult, because there are not that many, and they're not on the same place all the time. And so what I advise them, use the ISCOL's website, because that's up to date, and there is good materials available electronically. And then if you really want a real person, then find your way through that organization.
So someone may find a researcher like you and then contact you and see about graduate work and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what they do, and then they say, well, can I do a promotion with you?
Can you tell us what ISQUALS is and their website address?
I think the website address is isquals.org.
Okay, and ISQUAL stands for the International Society for Quality of Life Studies, is that
yes,
correct?
And that is not just happiness, that is quality of life in the wider sense. And so the society also covers concepts like self-actualization and also social quality. And if you study happiness, you should be aware of the other concepts of the good life as well.
And some of those are what?
Well, some see the good life in particular conditions. They say, well, once you live in a democratic welfare state, then you have a good life. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's some point in that. At least a lot of people have a good life in that. But still, in affluent democratic welfare states, there are people who are depressed. And okay, so there is more about that. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the problems we have is that we know that a lot of things are good. Mm-hmm. But which combination of the good is the best? And this is where happiness studies can help us seek the optimum.
And it does seem like, in reading your work, that you look at attitude factors like optimism, but you also are acknowledging that your circumstances are really very important. Can you tell us more about that on a society or government level? How do circumstances affect your happiness or satisfaction with life?
Yeah, well, as a government, well, you're concerned with the well-being of the citizens, and you want to know what creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Well, then there are different stakeholders who have different answers. The socialists say, well, more income inequality, more state welfare, and the right, they say, well, more churches, and less divorce, let's forbid that, and well, there are different receipts, and you never know who's right. At least in the past, we couldn't know. Nowadays, we can compare across countries. And for instance, we can compare the countries which have a strong welfare state, such as Scandinavian countries, and not so strong welfare states, such as the USA.
And what do you find there?
Well, at first sight, it seems like that welfare state adds to happiness, because the Scandinavian countries have strong welfare states and people are very happy there. Mm-hmm. Yet, if you take the broader view and you include more countries, you see that the effect disappears.
Really?
Yeah, much to my surprise. In the beginning I didn't believe, I thought I made a mistake. But I've repeated it over and again, and there's no systematic effect of a big or a small welfare state. So apparently that system has both its good and its bad sides, which more or less balance. But there are other things that really make a difference.
Such as?
Freedom, for instance. The more freedom society allows its members, the happier they are. And you see that in the case of economic freedom. And if in societies where you're free to start your own business, people are happier. You see it in political freedom. If in societies where you're free to start your own political party, they are happier. And also, and mostly, in private freedom. And so in societies where you can, for instance, choose to smoke pot, people are happier than in societies where not. Even if smoking pot as such doesn't make you happier, but in the climate of freedom, people flourish better. And you see that most particular in the case of homosexuals. In societies that allow gay marriage, people are happier. Yeah, well, all societies have about 5% gay people. And if you forbid them to live the life that fits their innate preferences, yeah, 5% are less happy. And so this is a very substantial thing. And then always people say, well, freedom has its limits. If we have too much freedom, there will be enemy, and then people will get unhappy. Yes, theoretically there is a maximum for freedom, but still in the data we see that the maximum is not reached as yet. And the freer the society, the higher the average happiness up to now.
And no one's gone crazy or created an impossible, chaotic kind of quagmire from that. They haven't gone crazy or become anarchic completely. We don't have anarchy.
Some do.
But I mean, it's the societies, though, you're saying, so far, you haven't seen a disintegration.
No, we haven't seen that so far. What we do see is that multiple choice society has also its downsides. And one area where you see that is also in choosing whether to have children or not. And now we have the pill, we have the abortion, so we can really make the choice. And you see that a lot of people, particularly the women, have difficulty in making their choice. Should I have a child, yes or no? If yes, with that guy, and when? And that really keeps them busy and pondering for quite a while. In the end, most decide that they want to have children, but some have pondered too long and can't have them anymore. So there is a cost in making this choice. But if you look at the results, people are much happier. And, almost all the children born are wanted. And these children are also happier. And if you look at the data, then children are very happy. And the happiness of children also has increased over time.
Well, this seems one of your greatest contributions, to put all these ideas to the empirical test. And I want to thank you so much for your time today, Ruut Veenhoven. Be well, and I hope that you keep enjoying the good life yourself.
Thank you. Thank you.